All right. Awesome.
All right, so this is something that it's actually a worksheet that I use with clients, and I send it to you. I think it'd be really cool to put it up and give people access to it. It's something that if people end up not watching the replay, there's enough instruction on it where you can kind of figure it out on your own. But going over how to set over SMART goals, and a lot of people I think know the acronym for SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. You want to make sure that there's a deadline on there. Part of the reason why I think it's super relevant now is that the quarantine, everything, the shutdowns keep getting extended. And I think that if you allow yourself to fall into a position where you don't have a plan, you don't have a set concrete goal, every couple weeks this gets extended by is that many more weeks that you're going backwards. You're either moving forwards or you're moving backwards. Unfortunately, I think we're in a position where there is no kind of maintaining, so to speak, because if you're not actively working towards something rather, I definitely think that your mental and your emotional fitness are going to take a hit as well. So I think that the SMART goals and setting a goal is not just important for your physical fitness, but for your emotional well-being as well. So to start out and just go through it step by step, I think it's something that if you're watching this, if you're going to be doing this, I encourage you, even if you don't print the sheet out, figure out what your goal is over the next 8 weeks while you're still kind of stuck inside or maybe in a more stressful work environment. Hash that out and put that somewhere where maybe it's on your fridge, on your mirror, the first thing you see when you get up in the morning, but put it in a place that you are going to be exposed to it constantly. And so other members of your family see it too. That's going to help keep you accountable. But the first thing is it's got to be specific. And I think John's a really good example of that. Going into it, right, he had a specific goal. He wants to do a bodybuilding show. When that is, we don't really know, but it started out as a specific goal, right? I want to do a bodybuilding show. And he knows that to do that, he has to obtain a certain level of leanness. He wasn't just going into it, all right, I want to get healthy. All right, well, how are you going to measure that? I want to lose weight. All right, well, how much? So you want to be specific with that. So for me, my current goals right now is 0.5 pound to 1 pound a week of fat loss. Super specific. It's not just, okay, I want to lose weight. I know how much weight I want to lose, and I actually put a little bit of a schedule on it. So that's super important, is if you want to have a goal, you need to understand what that goal is, because then you can't really measure if you're doing it or not. And then the next thing is you want to make sure that it's measurable. So again, I want to get healthy. All right, well, how do you measure health, right? Do you want your blood work to get better? Do you want to go by progress photos? Are you going to measure yourself? Are you going to weigh yourself? Are you going to do a combination of all those things, right? So how are you going to keep track of your progress? This is something that I usually send out, especially clients I don't see all the time. I have a lot of clients out in Florida that I've worked with that I've sent this to, where, you know, are you going to measure? Are you going to send me progress photos? And you'll see I describe some measurements that you can take. Your neck, your chest measurement at the nipple line, waist, hips, arms, thighs, right? But you want to take inventory. Maybe that's your goal. Maybe your goal is better blood work. But what are you going to do where every so often you can check in and take inventory and figure out if that goal is, if you're on track for that goal. So for me, again, my pound a week, I can track that easily by stepping on the scale. I also take progress photos, so I know if the scale didn't move that week, I can see if I'm moving in the right direction and maybe the scale isn't reflecting it. But realize you should have more than one way of measuring progress. I feel, especially if it's a weight loss goal, but you should know how to measure it, because then you know if you're going in the right direction or not. And the next one is kind of a sensitive one, because I feel like I never want to tell someone you can't do something, but I also think we need to be realistic. So attainable. Is it realistic in the time frame that you want it, right? A lot of people see a before and after on Instagram, right? And don't realize, well, all the steps that are in between that before and after photo. So again, using John's transformation as an example, you know, what's your diet? What did you do to do that? It's like, well, it was like 3 to 5 years of consistent work, and my diet wasn't the same the whole time, right? When you were way bigger, you were eating super different than you are to get stage lean. So realizing that goals that are super big might take a very long time. Are you willing to commit to that? And that's okay if it takes a long time, because the time's going to pass by anyway. And that's something people need to realize. The next 8 weeks, 10 weeks, however the hell long it is, it's going to pass by anyway. You can't stop that. What you can control is what you choose to do at that time. Now, if you're like, well, the next 8 weeks, I want to, do crazy amount of cardio and lose 100 pounds. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but that falls beyond the realm of what is attainable. So you want to find something that, yeah, ambition is good. And I'd rather you shoot for something, shoot for you shoot for the stars. And even if you fail, you end up on the moon or something equally cheesy like that. But you get the gist, right? If you set the bar super high, even if you miss the bar, you're still going to end up way ahead of where you would have been if you allow yourself to have really low expectations. But also realize you don't want to set yourself up for success. We're going off of weight loss, right? The average person can sustain about a pound a week of weight loss, half a pound to a pound a week. If you're a bigger person, a pound to a pound and a half, even 2 pounds if you're super huge, like over 300 to 400 pounds. If your goal is more performance-based, realize, are you a beginner? Can you consistently add pounds to the bar every single week? I can't. In the beginning when I started, yeah, I could do that. Now that's not an attainable goal for me to do, like a 5x5 program where I add 5 pounds to the bar every single week. I can't do that anymore. So to set that as my goal would not be attainable for me because I know I'm going to level off pretty quickly. I can't progress linearly anymore. So realize where you are in your journey, what your level of commitment is, and what your amount of resources are, right? If you're a first responder, an essential worker who's working 12-hour days, it might not be realistic to commit to 3 to 4 hours in the gym every day, right? So you want to be able to commit to something that you know you can do and you can attain in the time frame that you give yourself, with what you have and the resources you have. You might not have a home gym. That's okay. And you also want to make sure that your goal is relevant to you. I'm just going to keep using John as an example because I think it's anytime you see a dramatic change, I think people think that they want that dramatic change until they realize that it's not, it might not bring them the level of happiness that they think. So John has a really specific reason for wanting to do that, right? He wants to set the example that, yeah, you know what, it doesn't matter where you started from. I'm going to take this as far as I can because I want to show people I'm in a position of leadership and I want to show people what you can do when you put your mind to it. That is a super specific, relevant reason. He's a coach. He's in the business of changing people's lives. So it's super important that he puts his best foot forward and he's setting that example. So it's relevant to him. Is it relevant to me to get stage ready? Absolutely not. I would be miserable. I like food too much. I would not be happy. I would not want to step on stage in a tiny sparkly bikini. It's just not something that I would want to do. So for me to decide I want to get stage lean is not a relevant goal to me. I'm sure I have goals. I'm on a running program right now that is not relevant to John either, and he would probably rather jump off a cliff than do any of that. So realize that a goal could be super great, and you can have a great plan and a great diet and a great coach. But if the reason for doing it doesn't make sense for you, right? It's not something that you're passionate about. It's going to be really hard to stick to it. So anytime you're going through what your goals are and why you want to do something, really think, well, how are you going to feel when you obtain that goal? Because to me, if I got super stage lean, all right, cool, like abs, but my motivation for doing it, like, I wouldn't be that into it. John has a serious reason for doing it. He's in a position where he wants to show people, yeah, you can do a hell of a lot more than you think you can. So when your reason is bigger than you, you're going to find a way to make it work. But that's something to keep in mind is, if your friends are doing something, you want to hop in on it. Yeah, sometimes great. Other people are doing stuff and you want to be a part of it. But realize that whatever reason you undertake a goal, it has to be specific to you, or else I'm going to say like 7 or 8 times out of 10, you're probably not going to make it there because you're going to find a reason to justify it. I didn't want it that bad anyway. And you'll talk yourself out of it. For some reason, the T part didn't load, but T stands for time bound. And I'll add that in there when I send you the updated one. All that means is that it's a deadline. And I'm sure you've heard the phrase that a dream, what is it? I think a goal without a timeline is just a dream, right? So if you don't have an actual timeline or a deadline, you're probably not going to stick to your goals. And you're just going to keep extending the deadline, right? Well, I'll start tomorrow. Diet starts next week. That's why we're super big on, even if you aren't super big into competition, it's awesome to sign up for a meet. It's going to keep you on track.
Yep.
John had the bodybuilding show keeping him on point. If your goal is running, signing up for your first 5K, signing up for an endurance event, something, smaller like a Tough Mudder, if you're into the obstacle stuff. It could be even like a virtual 5K that you do on your own, just because right now everything's kind of on hiatus. But realize if you sign up for something or you put a deadline on it, it's going to make it more real. I like events for the simple reason that A, you're paying for it. I know that if I'm forking over money, yeah, I'm going to stick to it because I don't like wasting money. But also if other people are doing it with me, it's a very positive peer pressure. Peer pressure doesn't always have to be bad. Sometimes peer pressure can be really good. And that's something to realize, that if you have positive peer pressure because everyone has the same goal and everyone signed up for the same event or the same meet or whatever it is, it's going to be a lot more beneficial to you because now you've got a team behind you. So at the bottom of the worksheet, if you see, it kind of fills in the blank. So I want to blank, by blank, because blank. So for me, I want to lose a pound a week. I know I want to weigh in at 148, be walking around at 148 by the middle of August. I think the second Sunday of August is like August 15th or something. I have to look on the calendar. So I want to weigh 148 by August 15th because I want to be able to run better. I have certain goals right now that I know for me, if I'm lighter, if I'm leaner, I'm going to have a lot of an easier time doing it. Not to mention when I would like to compete in November. And I don't want to have to water cut. I want to just be able to just roll into weigh-ins and call it a day. I don't want to have to sit in a hot tub. And that to me is very relevant because I still have a little bit of hot tub PTSD from Ohio. So that's super important to me. It might be radically different for you. You might want to, especially I know local Brad, his goals are the exact opposite. He wants to put on size. But regardless of either direction, whether it has to do with your body composition, whether it has to do with performance, it has to be specific. You have to have a deadline. And you have to have a really good damn reason for doing it, because if you don't, it's not going to happen. You're going to talk yourself out of it. Even if you don't print out the worksheet, I would encourage you to kind of sit down and figure out, especially now, and you should always have goals, period. And I'm not just saying this because of quarantine and trying to get you guys to be in a better headspace because of quarantine. You should always have some kind of goal, whether it's occupational or, educational, self-development. It doesn't even have to be just health related. It could be, I want to read a book a month, right? Something to make you better. But I think right now, it's super important that everyone focuses on what they can control, because there's a lot that we can't. And the moment you realize that you're in control of a lot more than you think you are, A, your stress is going to go down, but B, your family's going to appreciate you a lot more, because you're going to be setting the standard of, right, I'm calm, I'm cool, I'm in control, I know what I'm doing, and the people around you are going to feed off of that, and everyone's going to be happier. And I think that's super important, that when you set the standard that you're putting your health first and you're trying to improve, other people are doing the same. So realize that when you do stuff like this, it's not just about you, especially if you have a family. They're going to benefit from it as well. They're going to learn from example. Your kids are going to learn from example. And you're going to be a positive influence, not just yourself, but on the people closest to you, which I think is super important. And since I've been using you as an example the entire time, John, if you have anything to add to anything I just said.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love it. There's a lot of I'll chime in with a couple of things, and I want to just continue the conversation, and then maybe since Brad has a meet coming up, we can kind of use him as an example, like in real time. I think that might be beneficial for people that are listening to this after the fact. But we'll get to that in a second. So Brad, why don't you while we're chatting, you can kind of brainstorm a little bit, and you can maybe write down some goals. Or whether mentally or physically, write down some goals for your meet and for the summer for your next contest. So I want to kind of dive in a little bit deeper. I guess the one thing I'd like to lead with is that there's some things I've seen kind of in the literature, or people every now and then will kind of tout, like I hear it's not too common in our field, but here and there I know there's some people that are like against goal setting, and there's some maybe studies that kind of show otherwise. from my experience, any successful person that I've really talked to is pretty big into goal setting at some point and in some capacity, excuse me. And everyone's a little bit different with how they do it. Um, but I do think that it's important to have a target. It gives you something to aim for and something to shoot for. I think that is critical. So it can't hurt. It gives you anything that's going to allow you to get focused. I think that's great. So I just want to. So in terms of the SMART kind of thing, you can kind of. I agree with having the time frame and putting on a calendar. I think having like a deadline is good. So now there are holes in all of these, and I think a lot of this is like very specific and person dependent on the person, I should say, and their personality, especially because we talked about. I think there's some ways that we can adjust this based on the person's personality and what their tendencies are. So let's just kind of start from so I think specific is kind of a more obvious one, but if somebody is like, they just say, I want to look better, or that, just the first part of that is just to dive a little bit deeper and to really kind of keep asking questions, and whether it be yourself or with your coach, keep asking questions so you get a little bit more specific on what they actually want. I think that's important to be able to articulate what you want, because I think a lot of people they might not know what they want. So I think diving a little bit deeper and getting the more specific, the better. I think that's a good rule of thumb. And then we can kind of dive into the specifics. So in terms of measurement, this is something that I kind of go back and forth because there's some people that they love tracking their macros. Some people don't track at all. Some people just kind of eating intuitively is like a thing now and all this stuff. So I always say, you can't really manage what you don't measure, right? So what are some people that are really maybe adverse to measuring themselves? Maybe they're afraid to getting on the scale. So what are some ways around this, and how do you figure out, is it as simple as just asking the client what they're comfortable with measuring, or how they would just let them choose themselves? How do you kind of know what's the best thing to measure in terms of their progress? Do you find that there's certain metrics that kind of everyone should what are your thoughts on that? And I can kind of chime in with what I think too, but I think that's kind of important. You gotta pick something to track.
Yeah.
And you gotta and you can get track crazy, and then you can kind of just be tracking instead of actually training, right? You can definitely go too far with it. So how do you kind of pick your metrics that are, how are you going to pick your highest priority things to track, and how can you determine that based on the person and their goals?
Yeah. So it definitely really depends on the person. And I think it really depends on the biggest context, and the biggest thing for me is, and I'm caught, and I can kind of argue with myself back and forth on this, because I can see both perspectives. I come from the perspective of, I used to have an eating disorder. I used to have a really bad relationship with the scale, and it used to cause me anxiety. But at the same time, I feel that the best thing I could have ever done was powerlifting in a sport where I had to be hyper aware of my weight, because now I've learned to remove the emotional value, and it's just a data point. So I think it's important in the beginning to be accommodating, right? I've had clients where they'll step on the scale and I'm going to look at it and they don't know. So they'll kind of humor me in that way. I have some where they refuse to get on the scale flat out, and that's okay. We'll do measurements and progress photos. So I think it's important to do what they're comfortable with in the beginning, but always move towards the direction of retraining their brain, where at the end of the day, data is data and has no reflection on you as a human being. Because at the end of the day, yeah, we can avoid the scale, but you shouldn't be avoiding the scale. At the end of the day, there's something fundamentally wrong with you stepping on a scale, being given a number, and having a panic attack. And I'm saying that as someone who used to live like that, where, yeah, I can avoid the scale for the rest of my life, but realistically, I shouldn't have to. And I think that's a longer, can you see me? There we go. My phone just flipped out. A longer kind of, journey with the client. And I definitely think sometimes, people do need help from a more professional source regarding stuff like that. But I would say start out with, what's going to be the least anxiety inducing. But my end goal is always, no point should data collection be driving me that insane. Yeah. It's a process.
Yeah, this is a really long conversation, but I just think it's kind of important, because I know there's some people that they want to track everything. And it's like, and then it's like, I feel like sometimes you're just spending more time tracking than like actually doing. And it's that becomes an issue also. So I think, pick like maybe 1 to 3 things that you're going to track. So maybe that's like getting on the scale. So like right now, since I'm not kind of going to the gym, I'm using the scale as kind of a barometer, and it's not great. But like once a month, I'm still like when I get my mail at the gym, or whatever. And once we get out of this situation, I'll do it more often. But I like to use a kind of body fat percentage on the in body it's a better metric for me. And there's some downside, there's some, error with that, but I'm looking at the trend of the data. So I think that's another important thing. I look at the trend, don't necessarily look at these short-term things. So like Mel mentioned before, I've been on a weight loss journey for like multiple years. It's not a straight line. There's lots of fluctuation. So don't be like, and it's the same thing with strength. That kind of drives me nuts when it's like, coach, it's like, I used to like squat like 500 and like I only did like 450 like today. And it's like, okay, like you don't need to be peaked like all the time. You don't need to be like in your peak condition, your peak strength. Like as long as if your goal is strength, if your strength is trending up over time, if your fat loss is trending down, if your scale weight is trending down over time, your fat loss is trending up. I think the trend is important, and don't like get too romantic about like just a small period of time. Look at yourself from week to week, but also kind of look at like month to month, 6 months, especially if you feel like you're kind of stuck. Because a lot of times with me, as you get more advanced, if you've been lifting a while, if you've been in a fat loss phase for a while, there's going to be periods of time where like you're just not going to have like measurement. So I made a post the other couple of weeks ago about like, I'm walking down. I just thought it was a good analogy. I was walking down the street and there's like a speed trap, and it kind of measures the car speed. So I'm kind of trucking along and I'm like, briskly walking, and the thing measures like 0 miles per hour. And I just thought it was kind of funny. So like I was actually physically moving, but it wasn't like registering. And I think that was like, I thought a great analogy, especially for like weight loss and things like that. Cause a lot of times you may not really see like any like movement on the scale for a bit. And then all of a sudden there's a big change, or you see a big change in the mirror, like all of a sudden. And same thing with strength. Sometimes you might not hit a PR for a while, and all of a sudden you add like 50 pounds to your deadlift. And it's not like it just happened overnight. All the stuff that you did months leading up to that point allowed you to kind of hit that like large personal record. So even if things are not kind of registering progress in like that instant moment, just realize that if you're checking off if your habits are in check. So I think that could be like another good thing is if you're really like afraid of the scale, for example, if your goal is, maybe your goals need to be more process oriented, especially in the beginning. I think that's a good practice anyway. But just kind of like maybe like the way you measure success, maybe it's not on the scale. Maybe it's okay. Well, did I hit my protein target, 7 days in a row? Great. Like, and then just give yourself a pat on the back for that. So it's a whole other discussion, but I just wanted to I think that's important. Measure, don't go too crazy. Pick like 1 to 3 things that you're going to measure, and just make sure it reflects. So like for like a power lifter, maybe like your metric is like projected 1 rep max if you do like a lot of AMRAPs, or maybe it's just is my meat total going up every year. I like to look at my PRs like over the course of a year. I don't really care about like what I did like last year. So I mean, yes, all-time PRs are great, but especially that I'm down like over 100 pounds, it's like for me to like look at all-time PRs is kind of silly at this point. So I like to look at like my PRs for like 2020 or my PRs for 2019. And as long as my strength is kind of like trending up, I'm like happy. And if I hit it, now I have all these different personal records in different weight classes, and I can kind of use that as a barometer moving forward. I think all these goals need to also be context specific. So anyways, I think that we kind of had a good discussion on the measurement part. This attainable piece, or like attainable and it being kind of realistic. This is a tricky one, I think, even for myself, because I think some people I kind of like to like have like kind of stupid goals, or like things that are like kind of like really outlandish. I kind of like to prove people wrong. I kind of like when my back's against the wall. I know I know that there was a lot of people that are like, this guy's never going to have abs. He's going to be fat POS. So his whole, like, I know that there was people that said those things, and I'm loving it right now. It's great. That's just fuel to the fire for me. Not to like to say that you should kind of harness the darkness and kind of come from a dark place all the time, but if you know like something like that could motivate you, then like use that to your advantage. If some people might not use that as motivation, so kind of understand like what's going to kind of keep you going. I like to like have a challenge. I like to be like, it was kind of like maybe not like the smartest thing for me to like set a goal of like, I'm going to squat 800 pounds in 6 weight classes and see if I can still squat 800 pounds after doing a 20-pound weight cut. And probably not like the smartest thing in the world, but that kind of got me fired up to know that like, I don't think anyone else has done this like ever. So like that was something that got me going. And that allowed me to kind of stand, that gave me purpose to drive toward that goal. And it felt, honestly, it felt damn good to squat 800 pounds in that 198 class and kind of check that box off. That was a really cool thing for me, especially kind of showing that you could lose all this weight and I could still like hold my own and lift like a, 4 times my body weight and, a very respectable weight. I thought that was really cool. So that like kind of got me fired up. Was it realistic? I guess so. I did it, but but when I first said it, or like even like I need to get stage ready by this time, and it's like, oh boy, I gotta get going now. So like when you kind of start to verbalize it, I think that can be like powerful to kind of get your butt in gear. Now my show was supposed to happen in 2 weeks. It's not happening. I'm kind of like ready-ish, but we're switching gears now and we're kind of extending out the diet and we're doing things, but if I didn't kind of set that deadline, I wouldn't be like if there was no show date in sight, I wouldn't have made the progress that I did. So that kind of allowed me to drive forward. So I like to have a goal that's a little bit like lofty and almost out of reach because that kind of fires me up and gets me going. If you're a beginner, I think we talk about setting up a low hurdle and then kind of you could slowly raise the bar over time. So maybe if you want to talk about that a little bit, maybe depending on the person's personality, but I'm always a fan of like success breeds success. So especially in the beginning, like don't be afraid to set a small goal. I had a consultation with a younger kid and he's like, my strength, I don't know if he's ever competed or not, but he said that his like gym total or his total was like 1,300 pounds. He's like, I really want that 2,000. I'm like, bro, how about like 1,350 first? Or
talk about rounding up.
We're like skipping some steps here. So, that's great. And so I told him, and I was kind of like trying to be nice about it. I'm like, that's a good like 10-year goal, and it's like, and like, again, it's very strong for someone his age. Like, I think he was like a teenager or whatever. And that's fantastic. But I'm like, dude, we're like skipping steps here. And I always talk about, I had another consultation years ago and he said, and I asked like, what's your goal? And he said, I want to squat 700. I'm like, where's your squat at now? It's like 365. So I told him it's funny you say that because that's actually, I've done that. I've made that progression. My first meet, I squatted 375 raw in the 198 class. And my best squat ever was 705 at super heavyweight with raw. So like, regardless, so I'm like, yeah, it took me about like 10 years. And I also put 100 pounds of body weight on. So I'm like, you guys, you want to sign up for the 10-year special? It's like, I'll give you a discounted rate if you pay in full, but it's like,
full package.
I'm kind of like joking like about it, but it's really like people like sometimes I think people overestimate what they could do in the short term, but they underestimate what they could do in the long term. So I think sometimes you have to kind of be, so maybe let's talk about like this attainable piece and then maybe talk about, I'm kind of getting into time frame a little bit. I'm kind of jumping the gun. So let's talk about the attainable piece. And because I'm the same way. I don't know if there's really any unrealistic goal, but I do think there's unrealistic time frames. And I do think sometimes the goals are not appropriate to the person. So like we know like one lifter that used to train at her gym and she's like, I want to qualify for the Arnold. And it's like, bro, like you're not like let's just like try to like hit a somewhat like kind of competitive total first before we even we're like, and not to say you couldn't do it, but we're like years away from it. So maybe let's like try to like, let's get some, so how do you have that conversation if someone's like kind of like not like kind of mentally where they need to be successful? Because also you want to see the person succeed, right? So if their goal is here and they're like here, like how do you kind of like start to kind of maybe bring them back down to, the level that they're at without kind of demotivating them? So maybe that's a good like. So I know that's like a tricky question. It depends on the person, but any thought?
I think it's also really important the context of whether someone is not even physically but mentally a beginner versus advanced. And what I mean by that is I think you and I are at a point where if I don't hit a goal, I'm not going to quit. Like I didn't hit 1200 at the Arnold, so I quit powerlifting. There's people that will go into, their first meet and have some kind of absurd expectation and then not hit it and be like, this sport is stupid, I'm done. And it's, you know, and I've seen it in CrossFit, I've seen it
Yeah.
in powerlifting, I've seen it in, it's just how people are. They get into something and they set an absurd goal with having no context of it because they're not really involved in that sport. So they just pull a number out of the air. When they don't hit that number, you know, instead of looking inward and trying to figure out exactly what happened, they get angry and, you know, that bounces out externally. All right, the problem is a sport, and they quit. So I think it's super important that, you know, is the person a beginner, you know, where the first defeat is going to crush them completely? Or are they someone who, you know, if they fall short of their goal, they are, you know, emotionally balanced enough where they can reassess and take a step back? Do they have that, you know, that thicker skin that they've built up from experience that they can do that? I've had people that they don't have that and they still want to set these huge ass goals. And I would never want to talk someone out of them. I think it's super important to, instead of talking them out of the goal, have them readjust the time frame. So if you're giving me a massive goal, great. That's our 1 year goal. I'm not saying that's not our goal, but that's our 1 year goal. So let's talk about our month by month goals now. We have our 1 year goal. I'm not taking that goal away from you, but recognize it's a longer duration goal. Let's talk about shorter goals that we can check off and build up that momentum of wins so that eventually I can help you get to that 1 year goal. So I'm not really saying no, you can't have that, but we're going to alter the timeline. And also between the two of us, we're going to come up with smaller goals that you're going to hit along the way to level up so that eventually you're the kind of person that can obtain that long-term goal. And I think when you set it that way, where I'm not taking the goal away from you, but I am kind of pushing it further back and I'm forcing you to create smaller goals. You realize it's not just, okay, set big goal.
Kind of
It's set a small goal and hit it.
And they kind of start to kind of figure it out, like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah. Oh, it's a process of doing, you know, gradually bigger and bigger things until I get to that one big thing. But I think that kind of puts them in a position where I'm not ever discouraging, but I am starting to slowly shift your thought process. So you realize you're in it from the long haul, and, you know, a 30-day challenge isn't what's going to get you to what you want.
I like that. So like kind of a recap, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. So I think if you are a coach listening to this after the fact, and you know, someone maybe is like, the goal is maybe like not in the same like universe like where it should be, because I do think that I think if the person like wants to challenge themselves, I'm like all about that. I think that's important. I think adversity and I think that hardship it is what makes you grow. So I think there has to be some element of challenge there. And I think in general, if you're a beginner, I think a small challenge is like totally fine. And then making like, even like, I don't want to say like kind of, you know, like my buddy, my old coach, Jesse Burdick, used to say, sometimes you just got to throw yourself a softball, and that's okay. Like just throw yourself a softball, like, especially if you like are somebody that's maybe like failed a lot and you're just like, kind of like, if you're like maybe like playing your last card and you're kind of like mentally done and you're like, I really need this to work, throw yourself a softball, just like gain some momentum and just kind of like get going, like just get some small wins, like just get on the scoreboard, and then we can kind of like work on like those more challenging things. Like for me and like you, I think at this point it's like, you know, like, I mean, there's been like a couple, like I said, I ended up like during my, my goal of squatting 800 in 6 weight classes, I missed it. My first meet at 242, I only squatted 770. So I could have like repeated that. I'm just like, you know what, my weight loss is going good, so I'm just going to go down to 220. My weight loss is going good, so I'm just going to go down to 198. And then I kind of worked backwards, and, you know, I had a really fun bulking experience during the holiday season, which I don't know, it was kind of good to get out of my system, but, you know, I just like, it was okay. Like I missed like, you know, and on paper, like the 242 should have been like the easier one. Like that shouldn't have been like that hard. Like, but for whatever reason, I just like missed the mark. I actually had a really good meet. I just didn't squat like well for whatever reason. My bench and deadlift went like great that meet, but yeah. And then I just kind of like, you know, like it should have been, and then the first time at 220, I missed it very close at Reebok Record Breakers. Did that in California. I'm going to blame that one on Stevie though, because my knee wrap came on. came undone. That's been like a reoccurring theme, I think, in a couple of meets. But in my last contest, I squatted 835 with only one knee rep on, so that was a big win for me. But that's just a little story there. But sometimes you just find a way to kind of get it done, and I think that sometimes you just kind of like you just got to just do it. So as far as adjusting the time frame, the way I kind of like to look at it is like, sometimes like you encounter roadblocks like I did, like I had missed my goal, and then you kind of reevaluate. It's just like when you're on a trip, like sometimes you hit a roadblock, sometimes there's unexpected traffic, sometimes there's an accident. It's just going to take you like longer to get there, and like just be okay with that. And that's like fine. Enjoy the journey, put on a new podcast, play a game with your friends in the car and enjoy the ride. Like that's like one thing I think it's really important. Like it's really cliche, but just kind of enjoy the process. Like, 'cause this is hard. This is hard stuff. Training is hard. If you want to like if you have really lofty goals of being like a high level lifter, a high level athlete, or a successful business person, it's hard. It's going to be hard. It's going to take you a long time. So try to enjoy it the best you can. It doesn't mean that I get upset and we all get upset sometimes. We all kind of feel bad about ourselves. We feel bad about ourselves for like a minute or two. And then like we've been talking a lot about, like, we're kind of too busy to like kind of, be sad and depressed because we're on the move. We're moving. And when you're moving, blood's flowing, you feel good. So just kind of stay active toward your goal. And I think one of the things that I've been doing now, because I've been really good at goal setting as well, file the goal and then start to focus on like the steps, like Mel talked about. Start to work backwards. What are the steps that's going to take you there? And I'm sure that'll be like another kind of chat we could have. That's a whole other discussion. But so once you kind of have the goal in place, know your why, have fun with the process, and then you can kind of start to kind of work on like whatever habits you need to kind of get there. And the more consistently you focus on dialing in those habits. So like if you want to be an 800-pound squatter, what are the habits that an 800-pound squatter needs to have? And you need to reverse engineer those. You need to kind of work, and that may take you several years. It may take you 5 years. It may take you 10 years. You may need to gain body weight. So I like to kind of start to, especially if I know that they're maybe not ready for it, when we start to talk about, well, these are the things that you're going to need to do, and see if are you willing to do those things? Is the juice worth the squeeze? That's a really important question, because if your why is not strong enough, and you're not like, I don't know if that's really worth it to kind of put in all that time, that effort, the diet, the sleep, the nutrition, the supplements, the mindset training. There's a lot that kind of goes into being a high level athlete. Not everyone has the same, genetic gifts, and they can kind of just walk on, to the platform and, deadlift 800 pounds for the first time. It takes a lot of work for the average person to do something like that. So, I want to, let's just maybe like, I think a good way to wrap up would be to use, Brad, if you want to maybe share a goal that you have, and then we'll kind of just dissect it. And then I think that'll be a good way so that people can kind of like learn. So maybe if you want to share a goal that you have, it could be for an individual lift or whatever you want to share, but maybe like what you want to deadlift or what you want to squat at the contest. And then we can kind of reverse engineer that.
I mean, this is only going to be my second contest, so I've been wanting to compete for years. And a lot of people make the mistake of always making an excuse why they can't do it. I had a lot of excuses why I couldn't compete the whole time. I wasn't strong enough, blah blah blah. So finally, this year I did it, and my goal was to have a 1400 total in the 198 class. Neither of them I accomplished. I weighed 210 the day of the meet, with zero weight cut, and I think my total was 1360. So
let's just kind of stop for a second. So in your mind, though, was that a success or was that a failure for you?
it was a huge success because, I took what I wanted to do.
So that depends on, I think that's a great way. You can look at that one of two ways. I didn't reach the 1400, or I achieved the 1360 and blah, blah. So yeah, let's unpack that a bit, because I think that's a great take home. So why did you view that as a success?
Well, that's at first, like you said, I could have viewed it as a complete failure, but instead of, being a failure, I said, you know what, it was my first meet. I PR'd, it's great. Something to build off of. Yeah. So I took it right away the day of the meet and said, it was all wins. Everything was a win. So, I think that's a big part of it is, not always looking at the negative.
Yeah, so how you frame it, I think, is huge. And you could choose to focus on the positive, you could choose to focus on the negative. And it's not to say that you can't. I think it's important to like analyze your weaknesses and analyze the mistakes you made, but you view that as a learning experience. Don't view that as a failure, and then build off your successes and build off your wins. So you actually stepped up and you did a contest. You set out. You hit your goal of actually competing. Would you just miss? You went like 8 for 9 or something like that, or would you?
8 for 9, yeah, 8 for 9.
Pretty darn good. So that's a lot of successful attempts. Darn near perfect day. And I know like there were some things that and then you're gonna now what that's like. And I always tell people, especially your first contest, everything is a personal record because you've never done it before. And now, like you said, now you have a baseline to shoot from, and now you can start to kind of build off that. And you can kind of keep rolling. So that's great. So now, based off what you did in the first contest, what would you like to see happen in your second meet?
I mean, so in my second meet, I've not put a total. I wanted a total more than what my first meet was. That's going to be a win. I don't want to set. I want it to be attainable. You know what I mean? So I'm an overachiever. I could easily say I want a total 1,600. Not going to happen probably, but I think I'll do more than what I did last time. So, that's the goal.
Great.
And, I may or may not. My body weight's consistent around 212 for the past couple months. So, I may think about dropping down to the 198 just to check that box off. It's something that I'll look at and talk over with you. And,
right. So anything that like you did, as long as you kind of did more than last time, that's a win. I think that's great. So just for like the sake of the video, it's just like what's like maybe like what's a goal for like your deadlift, for example, or what's a goal for your squat that you'd like?
So I missed 550 in the meet. That was my one lift I missed. I've deadlifted before over 550, so I'd like to hit at least a 550 deadlift in the meet. That'll be a PR. July 25th.
So like your smart goal might be that your goal might be deadlift 550 pounds in the 198 class on July like 25th. Just the more specific you can be, the better, and you can start to kind of visualize those things. One of the things that I've learned a lot from Josh Bryant, just for people like, and it's just like a mindset trick. Like I'll write like, so like my goal, I'll read you I can see my fridge from here. I said, I give myself permission to be 10% body fat, and under 200 pounds, body weight, and stage ready. Originally it said May 30th, but I had to cross it out because the day of the show got canceled. So now it says, I have to change it again because that second show got canceled.
Jesus.
It says June 27th, but that show got canceled also. So let's pretend here, but I'll change it. So now I'm like, oh, crap. It says I give myself permission to, but this part is true. It says I give myself permission to be 10% body fat and under 200 pounds body weight, and then it will say after the call, because I realize that I have to change it again. Bodybuilding show stage ready on August 1st. Okay, so that's that's third time's a charm. And if there's if it gets canceled, if it gets canceled again, I'm just going to be Mr. like Wantagh, and I'm going to have a photo shoot in the backyard, and I'm going to be strutting my stuff. I'm going to put my tanning stuff on because I got all my stuff. I got my man kini, whatever you call it, posing trunks. So I'm ready to go. So, but joking aside, I think the point, and then I actually also have some goals for my meet in December, which my goal is total 2,000 pounds in the 198 class. But the point is I give myself permission to, so it's just like a really nice way to say it. Cause I think a lot of us, sometimes you need to be mentally ready to accept that's kind of success, and you will only be as successful as your self-esteem allows. That's something I learned from my business coach. And there's some certain aspects where I'm really confident in myself, and there's still some aspects like, maybe business-wise, some other facets of my life where I'm not as confident in. If you can have the confidence to give yourself permission to whatever you want to achieve, that is a huge, huge step in the right direction. So you have to have the mindset to accept the goals that you want for yourself. Because if you don't I could say it, but if I don't believe it inside of it, if I don't believe it in my heart, it's not going to happen. You're going to find ways. I'm sure you guys have seen an athlete that always finds a way to like miss the winning shot, or like it's just like one step, like something that he trips before the finish line. That's a mental thing. That is not a physical thing. So that if you could either find a way to win or you could find a way to lose. So I invite you to find a way to win. So that starts with giving yourself permission. So you might want to say, I want to, Mark Bell used to write down the total he wanted. When he would get out of the shower, he would kind of write it on like the foggy part of the mirror. So you might say, I want to bench like 854. That's like the kilo number. Or I want to total 2,600, like he would write that every time he would get out of the shower. It's just like a mental thing. And I think a lot of great athletes do that. So I think it was Kyle Dake, a really accomplished wrestler out of New York. He was a 5-time New York State champion, I believe, and a 4-time All-Americans in 4 different weight classes. So like Kyle Dake would write down his goal. It was either Kyle Dake or Troy Nickerson, but so Kyle Dake was a 4-time NCAA champion in 4 different weight classes. Sorry, Troy Nickerson was a 4-time All-American. I forget which one it was, but one of these New York State wrestlers, he would write down his goals every single day. Like that was like his thing. So you kind of like hear these stories, and it's just an anchor. It just keeps you focused. It keeps you honest. So apparently I haven't been looking at that part of my fridge. So I got to move that up, but because I have to adjust the date. But that's like on my mind like all the time, and I'm like a robot. I'm just kind of like accomplishing those tasks every single day, and I'm just kind of like I'm putting my feet to the pavement. I'm getting to work every single day. And I'm making progress toward that goal. I'm not there yet. I'm getting very close. This is the leanest I've been. But if I never kind of had the mindset to do it, and if I didn't put that on paper, it would have like never happened. The fact that I verbalized it to the universe now, and just with my personality, I feel like I'm obligated to do it now, and because I'm in that leadership position. Excuse me. So, so in terms of Brad's goal, is it specific? Is it something that's measurable? Is it attainable? He checks off all those boxes in every single category. So he's absolutely from being his coach, from people that are coaching him, like he's doing all the things that he needs to do to be successful. So then the next piece we'll talk about another date is maybe kind of figuring out like what are you going to be. The next step would be once you have your goal, what are the daily and weekly tasks you need to accomplish in order to kind of get there, and that's when you can break it down. So that'll be like an episode for another day. So I think that's probably a good place to close out. Mel, do you have any other like closing remarks, or before we close out?
Yeah, I think 2 things. The first one is the more you can expose yourself to your goal, I think the better. I've made wallpapers. I've on my phone, every time I open my lock screen, I get slapped in the face with it, and that's like, especially as much time you spend on your phone, that's hard to ignore. You just see it constantly every time you open up your phone. But do whatever you have to do where you're constantly seeing it and you can't ignore it. And I'm a big fan of making sure that other people know about it, because I think once you got skin in the game, you're not going to back out. Like at this point, if you have told you blasted over social media, you're gonna do a bodybuilding show and you pull out at the last minute, you're not gonna do that. Like you're not gonna do it. Like it's just not gonna happen. So I think there's enough. If you have enough, and that isn't to say that everyone's watching you and people are gonna be bashing. I mean, everyone talks, whatever, but
perception.
Yeah. I think our own perception of everyone's watching, scrutinizing everything I do, I don't think is accurate. I don't think people are watching you as closely as most people think you are. But at the same time, I do think there is some merit in feeling like you're being held accountable by your peers. So it's a fine balance between feeling like all eyes are on you, because they probably aren't. But if that helps, sometimes it gives people that nudge to do the right thing even when no one's really watching, because you know that there might be people watching.
I think there's something powerful about just like, and it is a little bit like woo-woo, and maybe I've been hanging out with too many hippies and yoga people and vegans, but I don't know. But I do think that there's like, I don't know if it's like, with the law of attraction and all these things, but I think there is something about putting it out in the universe that's putting it on paper, telling somebody, have it out on your fridge. Like, I like, one of the things that, I'll tell this quick story and then we'll close out, because I think it's very pertinent. one of the exercises I did before I opened up my business is I wrote the exercise. You kind of like write out like your perfect day from the time, and you try to pick a typical day, and you kind of write out from like what time you get up in the morning, what you're doing, what you're eating, and the time you go to. And at the time I was teaching, at the time I was working as a personal trainer, and I wrote I was going to like own my own gym, and I was going to quit my teaching job, and I like, wrote down like all these things. And now, fast forward 9 years later, and my day is, well, besides this coronavirus thing, my day is pretty much that. I have my own gym, and I'd go train with my buddies, and but so all these things have happened, but but the first step in that was just putting it on paper. And there was a lot of time in between in order for that to happen. But so I think that's really important, is just kind of, if you have a goal in mind, put it out in the universe and just go for it. So I hope this chat helped you guys out. Thank you guys for listening. And then I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll talk to you guys next time.